Good afternoon and welcome all. This is the special meeting of the Board of Commissioners to address the pandemic. It is Tuesday, September 22nd, 2020 at 3:04 p.m. Again, welcome all. I'd like to call the roll call. If everybody would just wave your hand when I cite your name, please, so we can identify you easier. Commissioner Jay Legree. Present. Commissioner Susan Gay.
Here.
Commissioner Patrick Gossett.
Here.
Commissioner Richard Byrne.
Here.
Commissioner Ed Chernowski.
Here.
Commissioner Pat Caluzzi.
Here.
And we have City Solicitor Glenn Dallas and City Manager Sharon Lynn here. Welcome, everybody. We have some correspondence, and other than Jenny Burton and Jeff Balk, do we have any additional correspondence?
I have not received any.
All righty. Well, I wanted to acknowledge two bits of correspondence that hopefully all the commissioners will have received one, I believe, from Jenny Burton. It has to do with what I call parklets. She's making 3 recommendations. Parklets are her recommendation for dining in the streets opposite the storefronts of the restaurants and keeping the sidewalks clear for pedestrians. Her second recommendation was to consider special activities on the boardwalk to draw people in. And her third suggestion was for us to consider special activities in the parking lot of City Hall, specifically putting a big circus tent there for holding activities underneath. So thank you, Jenny. They may come up in conversation. Most likely they'll come up in conversation at a subsequent future meeting. In the meantime, we can get that embedded in the future agenda so that everybody can see that. The other was a text from Jeff Balk at Snyder's Candy Store, only to me. I just got it, I guess, yesterday. And his comment was, has anyone considered how difficult it will be for sidewalk sales and social distancing, especially with the restaurants with tables and areas roped off? So if we would just keep Jeff Balk's comments in mind as we discuss things going forward. I did want to share with you that I was on a call this morning with the governor. He has a regular meeting with all the mayors to talk about all things COVID-19 and a few things from the governor, and that is that he discussed some of the new challenges since Labor Day, that even with nice weather at the beach, we did not see an uptick in cases associated with beach communities, and public health is continuing to monitor, so that's certainly a good thing. He did find out that there were increased cases at University of Delaware, and overall the governor stressed that we need greater vigilance in all the municipalities and enforcement statewide, and that most likely the individual municipalities are going to need to do some of the enforcement themselves. Public Health is working on Halloween guidance, and we expect to hear something from them later this week or first of next week. I do want to remind people, there's a press release out from the governor's office that last week Governor Carney launched a free mobile app called COVID Alert DE. It's a free app. It protects privacy. Typical contact tracing relies on an individual remembering all the names of those they've been in contact if they come down with it, and for how long they were in contact. Using this new COVID Alert DE app will help to speed up the process of notifying close contacts and identifying those close contacts. So I would encourage everyone to download this app and help in our fight against COVID-19. Your biggest, easiest resource is our own City of Rehoboth Beach website. It has information and resources related to COVID-19 right on there, and I would use that as your first go-to site for more information about COVID-19. From there, we're going to go into the purpose of the special meeting, which is to discuss strategies and path forward and address COVID-19 pandemic with respect to various topics. Today, we'll be focusing on outdoor heaters and fans and barricade. I would like to just give a brief introduction, much more brief than I did the other day on this topic. And that is, my goal is that we address individual topics over the next many months and culminate in policies for continued COVID activities, and also culminate in amending or new codes post-pandemic. And I gave the example of outdoor dining, that if we want that to continue post-pandemic, then let's start right now to try to create some rules and guidelines and everything. Of course, we have a timeline for that, and that would be, we set the goal of late February or sometime in February to accomplish that. And so with that, I would like to turn this over to Patrick Gossett, Commissioner Gossett, who's the liaison for this topic, and City Manager Sharon Lynn.
Thank you, Stan. I believe City Manager Lynn, you have prepared some documents with regards to number of participant restaurants and conversations that building and licensing has had with those. Do you want to have a little update on that information, specifically with the barricades?
Certainly. Good afternoon, commissioners. So I think this agenda item, as Mayor Mills put forward, outlines generally what we need to speak about. There'll be others that we add here from time to time, but the first two topics, outdoor heaters and barricades, are certainly germane to the fact that the summer season has ended. We're into the shoulder season in the fall. The weather's changing appropriately, actually, maybe even a little quicker than in other years. It is cooler in the evenings and throughout the daytime. But generally, and speaking from parking revenue, this last weekend, that was the last weekend of the season regarding meter parking and parking revenue, the city overall did well. So it tells us that there are still, as we see every year, people coming into the city, especially on weekends, people frequenting retail stores and restaurants. With that said, it being September 22nd, we did rent the barricades. We currently have we originally started out with a little over 300. We're now down to 100, a little over 100, 103, I believe. And those barricades are being rented for $15 each. That was our summer reduced price because the barricades were not needed by the contractor that we were dealing with, but the contractor does need them and we need to either keep them or return them in the next 30 plus days. So the rent, $15 a piece, increases to $100 a piece starting November 1. Frankly, we can purchase them for $300 a piece, but let Dennis and Howard, who put this inventory together, I'll let them speak in just a few minutes. But my recommendation is that we have the barricades picked up starting on November 2nd. Our city crews can do that on Monday, November 2nd, and return those barricades to the contractors because they increased from $15 to $100. And based on the information you're going to hear from Mr. Jenny, who circulated amongst the 44 restaurants that have approved dining outdoors, and those 11 restaurants that have barricades, it was pretty hazy at best whether or not they're even going to go outdoors. So obviously, if the weather is nice, even into November, they would like to be outdoors, but we're going to recommend that they just put tables and chairs up against their buildings if they choose to do that. Remove the barricades for allowing pedestrian access and parking. As far as heaters, you know, we'll talk about that as well. But that's my recommendation. I don't think we need the barricades any longer, and we certainly don't need to pay the extra expense for the 103 barricades. We do have the city purchase 50 barricades, so they're there to be used if we need them. Dennis, if you can just talk about your spreadsheet that you put together and the work that you did. Thank you very much to both you and Howard for speaking to each individual restaurant manager or owner to get an idea of where they want to go in the future.
Okay, great, thank you. As the city manager has mentioned, Howard Rothstein, Code Enforcement Officer, and myself spent some time last week visiting the majority of all the restaurants in town, to kind of get an idea of what their plans moving forward were. We targeted at first the 11 restaurants that are utilizing the barricades. One of the questions we asked was, what are your plans for business hours come November 1st? 2 were definitely are going to be closing the months of January and February. 3 of the restaurants were clear that they were unsure. The last 4 restaurants, 5 restaurants, all had stated that they would like to remain open year-round, but everyone's taking it on a day-to-day basis. Some days are better than others, nice weather. If you know, come December, there's a couple of nice days, they might want to stick some seats out there. So realistically, it looks like overall, a lot of uncertainty out there. Asking them, you know, come January, in the middle of winter, what are your plans? Would you still like to be able to sit outdoors? As much as they would like to, they were up front and honest, stating that when it gets cold out like that, we honestly do not think that we're going to have outdoor seating. So we talked to them about heaters. Anyone interested in putting the propane heaters out? We had 2 of the restaurants with the barricades that stated that, yes, they were looking into it. The problem here right now is no one is able to locate them. They're out of stock. So they're having a little difficult time finding them. And of course, we did ask everyone, including everyone without the barriers, how they felt about permanent seating outdoors post-COVID-19. The overwhelming response was yes, definitely would love to have it. It worked out great for everyone. So that's our findings for those with barricades.
And I did want to also mention that keeping the date of November 2nd in mind, we do need to remove the barriers anyway, just in preparation for any cold snow event that we might have. The plows will certainly need to have the this roadway surface unblocked. So that's another reason for having them removed.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is, Sharon, you're recommending removal of barriers, allowing the dining areas to be placed against the facades, and then as far as heaters, just allowing heaters. And I guess let's take the easy topic perhaps is heaters. You know, are there any, obviously they have flame in them, and I assume they're talking about propane ones, so they're self-contained, versus ones that have to run an electric cord over the sidewalk.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Correct. Talking about the see the tall ones with the propane bottles. So I did a little bit of digging into that as well. I looked into the National Fire Protection Association's recommendations with those types of heaters. I also looked at some other municipalities throughout the country, and it pretty much comes down to, take for instance, Cambridge, Massachusetts. They actually they have codified it, and if someone wants a propane heater outdoors, then they have to get a permit through the fire department. The fire department then goes and inspects where they're going to place these heaters. And there obviously are some requirements through the NFPA and also manufacturer requirements that they would need to adhere to. Such things as combustibles, distance away from combustibles like walls and such, not placing them in the paths of ingress or egress, of course. And a big one, keeping them 5 feet away from any entrance or exit. Obviously, we did also talk to them about heaters and tents. There was only a very minimal amount of restaurants that were interested in having the tents. Problem with the tents is you can't have those type of heaters in them unless they're vented. So that's pretty much.
Well, when you say tents, are you talking about canopies with sides?
Correct.
So you can walk under them. And the fire marshal would control, they would have to get a special permit through the fire marshal to allow such a thing, is what you're saying?
Well, for the heaters?
Yeah.
So, I mean, we have nothing in our code, and there's nothing in the state fire code that you would have to get a permit. This was just an example I've come across some other municipalities out across the country. They ensure that they codify it, make sure they get permits and permission.
Yeah, as far as these flamed heaters go, they give off a lot of output.
Correct.
So they're very warming, and anybody that wants to sit out in the frigid cold and under a heater and eat, more power to them. So
Sure.
I'm willing to accommodate that. I'm more interested in the safety aspect of it.
Right.
As you mentioned, some of these have flames. They're not necessarily open flames, but they're visible, if you will. If you're going to have a tent that's enclosed, they do make a type of propane heater that can go in there, but it's a special type, and very few places rent those. So I want to make sure that we were covered there. The other thing is, on my mind would be wind resistance. Here we are, we're in a windy area. Are they going to blow over? Are they going to injure anybody? Is there going to be additional fire hazard for blowing over or hitting anybody, et cetera? And do you have any concerns?
Sure, and that's one of the things that I also noticed in some of these other ordinances with these heaters, where one of the requirements was to have them mounted or secured in a manner where they can't tip over. And I can tell you that we have a handful of restaurants throughout the city, not just the ones with the barricades that are interested in having heaters, but most of them have the idea that, I don't really know if I want to mess with them, especially when you got the wind coming up off the ocean. How effective is that heater going to be out there? So.
And if I may, I don't really think that with two restaurants advising dentists that they would be interested in using heaters, I don't really think we need to get in the weeds with them, because I think this is obviously the emergency pandemic situation that we gave a lot of latitude to, and we'll continue to do that. Of course, the governor's proclamation goes through March 31 of 2021. So, I mean, we'll certainly keep an eye out on it. We have plans to check in the evening hours and on weekends to see what the restaurants are actually doing. And I also wanted to just mention that in removing the barricades and reviewing what we have already constructed throughout the summer, you'll recall the handicap ramps that we had installed. The access ramps to the walkway, the pedestrian walkway, they're beginning to crumble. So our city crews would also be picking them up, on, starting November 2nd.
All right, all right. I guess what I'd like to do is let's finish the outdoor heater and fan topic,
Okay.
and then we'll get to the barricades, so that's very apropos. The topic says outdoor heaters and fans, and this was supplied to me. What does and fans mean?
Well, that was just inserted in there in case the summer months we got into fans.
Not too hot, or
Yeah.
because what would concern me would be running electric cords across the,
Yeah.
there. Commissioner Gossett, you have your hand raised, and then we'll go through all the commissioners, and then we'll give the public the opportunity to comment.
Mr. Jenny, thank you for the information. Two questions that I have. Do we have any restaurants currently in existence that are using heaters that you're aware of outdoors?
Yes, aware of 2 restaurants right now.
And are these that are on the sidewalks, or are these existing patios?
They're inside their patio section.
Okay, and you used the phrase, you talked about COVID, post-COVID questions if they wanted to continue dining, and you said for the most part, folks were in favor of it. Did you get any pushback at all from folks?
No, I had a couple of concerns, and these were from restaurants, two restaurants, one on Wilmington and one on Baltimore. Right now, it's been great. They have the 2-seaters up against their buildings, work great, but they're thinking realistically, if we go back to a normal summer with the crowds and the size of those sidewalks, it's not going to be a pretty sight.
Okay, thank you.
I will say, respond to Commissioner Gossett also. Boardwalk Plaza has used heaters outdoor to extend their usability of their outdoor pattern for decades, I believe. Yeah. Commissioner Ed Chernowski, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Dennis, and the city manager for getting that information and talking to the businesses. I'm in favor of allowing the outdoor heaters. I would put some parameters around it. You know, it can't be in an ADA compliant walkway. There can't be, cords running across the sidewalk. That there needs to be enough weight on it that it doesn't tip over. Even though I believe most of these outdoor heaters have safety mechanisms where if they fall, they will shut off. But I agree with the city manager. I don't think we need to get into the weeds. I don't think we need to codify this in an ordinance. I would just put some basic parameters around it from an administrative standpoint, and then keep an eye on it. But I'm in favor of moving forward with allowing it. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Gay, please.
Dennis, how many did you say were going to be open after November 1st when the barricades are coming down? How many would have outdoor? I know there was 4, but I thought that was after January. I couldn't remember your number for November.
So 5 of the 11 restaurants with barricades have voiced that they would be interested in staying open year round.
Okay.
That's their intention.
Okay.
Like everyone said, they're kind of unsure at the moment.
Right. Because one question I had about if we take away the barricades and the tables are...
Sorry, I want to interrupt you. I'd like to finish the outdoor heater topic, if you could.
Oh, okay. That's fine. Then I guess, I agree with what Ed said about supporting the heaters and making...
All right, so we're still talking about the outdoor heaters. Commissioner Calusi?
Yes. As far as the outdoor heaters, I think we need to be specific that they are of the type that are propane and we cannot have electric, because we will have the issue with electric cords running through, the areas. And also I don't believe that those are the ones that are like propane. They're very high and potentially somebody could knock into them. So there's, I would think, an issue there. But I am in favor of the heaters and propane heaters. I think that they would be a great addition. But one thing I'm confused about, it sounds like you were just addressing the people who had barricades that I believe 4 2 of the 5 would definitely be interested in staying open all year round. But what about the other 44 that are currently having outdoor and don't have barricades, but do have outdoor dining? For example, you have Dogfish has its own courtyard. You have Culture Pearl has a rooftop. You have Mariachi is using the side of their building, and so is Egg is using a parking lot. I mean, there are a variety of things. So could you tell me, Dennis, what group of those folks are looking to continue with outdoor dining?
Sure. The 44 overall, take the 11 out with the barricades. The rest of them that we were able to make contact with had 4 of them had voiced interest in outdoor heaters. Like I said, we had a lot of concern. People probably were not even going to bother with them just because of, middle of January, we're really going to be able to heat the outdoor area with the winds coming off the ocean.
Got it. So you're telling me out of the 44, there's 4 who are definitely interested.
So out of the 44, we're talking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 definitely yeses.
Okay, 6 definitely interested. Okay, so if we looked at this in terms of, so the governor has allowed for the businesses to go through the end of March, but perhaps we change it up and say, what about going to New Year's? How many are interested then? I would think that restaurants may be interested in this, shoulder season, then going into Christmas, that outdoor dining might be something that they might want to do through December, but may not be interested in January and February. Have you got any feel for that at all?
Dennis, let me just clarify. On your sheet here, your spreadsheet, 11.
I'm not looking at the spreadsheet. Was that sent earlier?
Yeah.
It was
No,
from
I don't think so.
last week's meeting. We can send it again for you.
Oh, that's fine. I can find it. I just stopped looking at it right now. So sorry. Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
So there's 11 businesses, 11 restaurants that currently have outdoor seating with barricades. The remaining restaurants that are using outdoor seating that are listed here, they don't have barricades. And part of what I heard you say, Dennis, in your contact was that, yes, they might like them, but nobody wants to say no because they don't know what the future holds as far as weather conditions. And again, I recommend we play it by ear with these restaurants and give them the latitude that we've given them all summer and last spring. So if it's a beautiful Christmas week and it's 70 degrees, that we, like I said, we would allow them to have tables up against their building for those that are able to do that. We're taking away, the barricades for the 11 restaurants that wouldn't be able to have that space. But for those that could have that space, we would allow that. I mean, there's no way to know right now.
Okay.
And can we come back to that? I'm struggling to finish outdoor heaters and fans.
Okay.
Well, if I wasn't clear, I'm in favor of the outdoor heaters if they are the propane variety.
Thank you, Commissioner Byrne.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Assuming we're trying to achieve consensus here around heaters, I'm certainly in support of what's been said thus far and within all the parameters of public safety and common sense. So I support what the city manager has recommended and Edward and so on have articulated so far.
Anybody else? If not, we'll go to the public.
Were there any ideas, Dennis, that you haven't brought up? Did anybody have an idea that we haven't talked about that might be a solution?
No, there hasn't been.
Okay, I'm in with everyone else. Thanks, Mayor.
Got 4 members of the public. We'll start with Carol Everhart.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. Everyone that I have talked to with the outside dining, again, they are all in favor of it. I think the take it a day at a time is exactly what they're going to do. If the weather's nice, they're going to utilize the space. If it's a bad weather day, they will not. So I think allowing the latitude, as the city manager said, would be very well accepted. And I do not see a problem with any of the businesses I have spoken with this kind of a plan. Outside heaters, propane, some latitude, and take it a day at a time.
Thank you, Carol. Rick Perry, anything specific to outdoor heaters? You're not on. Tom Evans and Sturgis, anything specific with respect to outdoor heaters?
Nothing to add. You're on target with all the safety measures in place. It's a good idea.
Same for me.
All right, so we'll conclude this topic. I hear a consensus, and I agree with the ability to use outdoor heaters at least through March, when the governor's order ends. I think that's fine, but with some parameters, and safety is certainly tantamount. And I think you heard Commissioner Ed Stranowski and Clusie, some of their policy statements should probably be included in there. Thank you very much. So let's move on to the barricades. Again, the recommendation by Sharon was to remove barricades so that we're stopping the rentals. They would be picked up. We would be picking up or cleaning up the asphalt ramps that have been installed, and allow dining against the facade. So I'd like to open it up for discussion among the commissioners. I would have a question about, it sounds simple, allowing dining against the facades, but what does that mean? You know, originally the commissioners and mayor did all this with the barricades and pedestrian ways out in the street for safety reasons, to promote social distancing and things. So if we now say that there's not going to be any barricades, there's not going to be any pedestrian walkways in the street, and we're going to allow dining against the facades, what parameters are we going to have there? Is it carte blanche? They can put as many tables as they want and block the pedestrian way? Or do we have a minimum pedestrian way width that we want to adhere to? Because obviously, some of the restaurants like Purple Parrot seem to only have 6 feet, 7 feet of width there, whereas Conch Island probably has 30 feet. So I'd like to open that up for discussion, please. Commissioner Sernowski?
Thank you, Mayor. I agree. I think it's time to start taking the barricades up and get rid of that expense. I would suggest that, you know, at one point during this pandemic, when we were starting to take some of the barricades away, I think Commissioner Gay cited some specific language from the CDC on what social distancing meant. And if it's not a prolonged interaction within 15 minutes, then it's not necessary to social distance. And you can have a table with people walking by, especially if it's outside. So I think what Dennis started using at that point with additional applications when we decided to stop putting the barricades up was whatever the ADA requirement is. And I think we should continue to make sure that it is allowed, outdoor dining is allowed on the sidewalks. They should try to keep it as close to their facade as possible, but they must maintain that ADA compliant walkway so people can get by. And I think that's what Dennis did sort of in the middle of this process as we stopped putting up additional barricades. So I would say that's kind of the starting point, I think, on what our expectations should be in establishing what type of walkway and how much space someone can use on a sidewalk.
I'd like to just respond to Commissioner Srnowski real quick. As far as providing ADA minimum width, ADA compliant walkways, that can be as little as 3 feet, 36 inches. And actually you can have choke points up, if I recall correctly, down to 30 inches as long as it's a minimum distance. And it widens up on either side of that way. So, you know, is 36-inch walkway, pathway along Rehoboth Avenue really sufficient? I would say if we were talking about the summertime, I would absolutely say not. In the wintertime, maybe so, but I think that it requires a little further thought on what is the minimum amount of distance we want to provide pedestrian ways, such that if there's anything left over, then dining tables could be put in that area. And again, you use the two examples at Conch Island and Purple Parrot, that if you said there needed to be 10-foot minimum pedestrian way for the winter time, for the summer might change, then that might leave 20-foot a dining area in front of Conch Island. But if you had a minimum of 10-foot pedestrian way required citywide, and you look in front of Purple Parrot, then they're not going to have that area at all. So, Commissioner Gay, you had your hand up next, please.
Yeah, although before I ask the question I was going to ask, I will say, going back to what Ed was referring to, it was actually the state health department that I spoke to about the, 6 feet versus 3 feet. And at the time, it was really based on length of exposure. And what they basically said is that if you're walking, down a sidewalk and someone is seated there, your exposure to them is seconds, and it needs to be more than, I think, 10 or 15 minutes. And in addition to that, they said it would be virtually impossible, to have 6 feet in most sidewalk areas anyway, thus the recommendation. However, I will say that, there've been, sort of recent reports about airborne transmission and just how far it goes. And in fact, they can go much more than 6 feet. So some of that is new information out of the CDC, and somewhat they're not even clear on it. They go back and forth as well. So it might be worth another conversation with the state health officials just to see if any of that has changed. Assuming it hasn't, then that's why I think I was comfortable with the ADA distance. But the question I was going to ask about removing barricades and the tables being next to the building specifically is, I thought there was a rule by the alcohol board that they had to be cordoned off, that any tables, in a restaurant serving alcohol outside had to have some barrier. And it doesn't have to be a barricade. It could be a corded off area. Is that true? And if so, are the tables that are next to the building going to have an area around them to separate them?
Yes, that is true. That you have to have a barrier that allows the waiter or waitress to walk to serve the tables and keep the public out of that area.
So let's be clear, when this topic was talking about barriers, it was talking specifically about the orange traffic barriers, the monster 6-foot things. And you're mentioning a barrier or fencing required by the Office of the Alcohol Control Board. And as Dennis indicated, yes, that's also required.
You would have to have that. So that has to be factored into the distance. I mean, in other words, so the 3 feet, the pedestrian walkway has to be outside of whatever area, not just the table, but whatever area is cordoned off.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Commissioner Byrne, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. And maybe my comment has just been answered. I was going to bring up barriers other than the orange rental ones. I'm certainly in agreement that those should be sent back on November 2nd, according to the city manager's recommendations. And then we need to clean up in the streets and the ramps and so on. But we do need to talk about the barriers that a number of restaurants have put up on their own. Some are incredibly well done and in wonderful good taste. Some are a little more makeshift. but we're not talking about taking those down. I'm assuming we're talking only right now about removing the orange street barriers, correct?
Correct, because again, those barriers that delineate restaurant dining areas, specifically for restaurants that serve alcohol, they're required to be in place as long as they have permission to expand their dining outside their regular floor and on the public space.
Right, and some of the spaces, however, and I think they all fit well on the public sidewalk, but a number of them are certainly larger than just being right up against the building wall, as you were previously speaking. So I'm assuming that we're going to support and allow those ones that come out from the building as long as they've been previously approved by building and licensing.
Well, I don't think those restaurants that have those, that have built those structures are actually open in the winter months, but Dennis can clarify that.
Sure, they're unsure. Like Abe mentioned, a lot of uncertainty. However, we do have the one down here at Claus that if we take the red barricades away, we need to go take a look at it again because they may not very well have at least that 3 feet of passage.
They do not.
They do not. That would have to be removed. If the barricades go, that structure at Claus would have to be removed.
Right. Removed or moved.
Or moved. Or
yeah, moved. Accommodate, the 2-seaters up against the building.
Well, see, that's where I need clarification. City manager, what I heard is allow dining against the facade. How I interpret that is 1 row of tables against the facade, such as at Ghoulies, such as at Frog Pond, such as, well, those are on public space, but such as Finn's, which is parallel to the facade, against the facade, but it's on private property. So, are we talking about 1 layer deep tables against the facade? Or are we talking about multiple layers against the facade? Because what I'm hearing from the city manager is 1 layer of tables against the facade.
That's correct.
And those are for, I think, more for the restaurants that have the current red barricades. Once we remove those, they're only going to be able to have those 2-seaters up against the building.
Well, and again, that's why I come back to what is the minimum acceptable and safe pathway for people transversing both directions on Rehoboth Avenue or any of the other streets. That ought to be an established minimum to be able to put tables out there.
And may I make a suggestion that, of course, the length of the building, you're only going to have the number of tables allowable, whereas you have 8 feet of distance between the edges of the tables. So for most places, it's only going to be 2 or 3 types of those. We kind of looked at it before where you need 2 feet of clearance between the edge of the table and the barrier that they put up for the servers to go. So between that barrier out to the curb, there should be a minimum of 3 feet for that ADA requirement. Now, some of the areas where there's a lot more space, we've said at least 5. It's just an unwritten rule that we've followed for quite some time through other issues because of our sidewalk requirement being 5 feet.
Well, I'm not going to be satisfied with that minimum width. It may work in the wintertime, but certainly as we approach next summer, we're going to have to.
Yeah, definitely. It works now. But you're right. Next summer, it's going to be a different story.
So Mayor, if I may, again, this whole, now that we're approaching the time when people probably will not be dining outside, the whole idea here is to give the restaurants leeway through March if the pandemic is to last that long and if the governor keeps everything in place right now. I think the next few months will be the time when, for the mayor and commissioners to decide, hone in on much of what you're talking about, space and, you know, really get into the substance of what you want, based on putting all of this into an ordinance, and a framework, you know, to vote on if you do, in fact, grant outdoor dining, on an ongoing basis. So, again, you know, we're dealing with a lot of moving parts. We went out there, vividly remember, in the end of April, we went to every restaurant, we configured spaces with them. Some, you know, wanted whatever they wanted, not agreeing with our approach. And we allowed them to do that because it was a time of the pandemic and everybody was unsure if they were even going to be open or not. And I think with the amount of restaurants that we have even open, we'll have to play it by ear and see, because I think Claus closes. And even though they said to Dennis, we're going to play it by ear and maybe, you know, see, I think they're, you know, concerned about their business and their revenue. And if it is nice, maybe they'll stay open an extra month. It's hard to tell. But again, I would just recommend that instead of, my recommendation, just only mine, getting into the nitty gritty, that we, again, deal with the restaurants and the businesses as fairly as we can, just to get through this.
I just want to make it very clear. I'm for the restaurants staying open. And I'm amenable to looking even beyond COVID, to see how we can accommodate it. But again, I'm looking at the safety aspect. I want to make it very clear. Right now, some of the restaurants where their tables go up to the edge of the sidewalk or edge of the curbing, they have pedestrian walkways out there. Now we're going to be taking away the pedestrian walkways, and that means something has to change for their table configuration. And I want to make sure we know what we're doing and what we're going to require. You know, if we're going to require that 3 foot or 5 foot minimum pathway, then I can be satisfied with that in the wintertime. And Sharon also makes a good point, because I posted the agenda today for our next meeting. And I suggested that conversation on outdoor heaters and barricades could continue on that agenda, rather than concluding today definitively. But also the focus on next meeting on the 29th would be business use of city public space and business use of private space beyond the business floor plan. So essentially, that gives us time between now and then to give it a little more thought to this topic, and then bring it up again at the next meeting. Ed, you've had your hand raised for a while, and yet you've already commented. Do you want to say something further?
I would. I would just like to thank the city manager for her sort of her thought process and explanation on this being sort of moving parts, and let's just deal with it on a case-by-case basis, and work with the individual businesses. I think it's important. I think we're still talking very short-term pandemic here. I do think that we need to have lengthy discussions about long-term and what parameters we want to see with the city surrounding outdoor dining and use of public spaces. So I would, my only last comment I would make is I'd like the city manager and Dennis to have flexibility. And I agree that in the wintertime, that 3.5, 4 foot ADA walkway is probably fine. And that may mean that in some spots, a business can use tables that are not just against the facade in areas where it's wider, on Rehoboth Avenue or other places. So I would like them to have the flexibility to work with each individual business on. But I think there's consensus that the barricade should come up, and we need to start moving in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Gossett, please.
Yes, thank you. I agree that the barricades, the orange barricades, should come down November 1st and be put away for foreseeable future. I think if we look at this as in dealing with the period between now and March 31st, where really the governor's executive order or emergency order and the ABCC are really giving us the guidelines on that. So that if we come up with a draft recommendation or guideline, it's not an ordinance, it's not codified in that sense, but the placement of tables, the aspect of distance that is acceptable. We still need to follow the 6 or 8 foot division between the tables that is outlined in the governor's orders and apply those to our specific needs, I think is the best way to go forward with that. And with the issue of the ABCC barrier restrictions, if we could supply, again, a picture book or a model or something to the participating restaurants, that these are suggested images or suggested barriers that could be used so that they have something to go on. And this is something that the Building and Licensing Department has approved for use in that area, if you will, as opposed to everybody having their own ideas. Just some guidelines as to size, to height. We have some specifics in our current patio ordinance that outline those, and maybe we should continue with those for equity throughout. But again, I think a model or a photograph or an image of some sort that gives the restaurants that wish to stay open outside some guidance in their barriers.
Thank you. Anybody else? Any commissioners?
Mayor,
Go ahead, Ed.
to Patrick's point, all of the businesses that currently do have approval from the ABCC had to provide a diagram or some written explanation on what that barrier was, and they have been approved with what was supplied to the ABCC. Just for knowledge standpoint.
My comment, though, was that if they're going to make alterations in their seating, and we are going to talk about seating up against the facades of the building only, that those barricades may have to be redesigned or moved, and that we should, for some sense of consistency, or at least giving the restaurants some guideline is what is expected from them.
Thank you, Patrick. Jay, did you have something?
Yeah. Was there feedback from the restaurant owners who said, hey, we need this outdoor space because we're limited indoors and we need it and we need to use it? Or was your feedback such that they say, well, we like the outdoor space, but we usually have space indoors? I know sometimes when we eat outside against the facade, inside still has spaces open. We like to go to the Indigo and they have a lot of indoor space. But I wonder if are we managing a space that's short of, do we need that outdoor space, or is it just nice? What are you hearing from the restaurateurs?
So what I'm hearing, I've heard from a couple of them that stated that without this outdoor seating, they probably would not have made it.
Right.
They all like it. Right. They all really enjoy it, and I did ask some of them, if we go back to 100% occupancy, phase 3 or whatever it is, do you need the outdoor seating? No, not necessarily, but it's a nicety.
Okay, but we're not there yet.
No.
I hear you.
Commissioner Calusi, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just one point, and I think that this is probably evident to most people, but the majority, or I should say a lot of people, will only eat outside. They will not eat inside of a restaurant during COVID. So I think that that's just important to note. And as Dennis said, in my own research and talking to people, restaurant owners, they would not have been able to stay open had they not had that outdoor space. That's my.
Thank you. So we'll open this to the public. The topic is barricades. It's kind of morphed into business use of city public space, but that's really the next agenda's item for the 29th. So Carol Everhart, are you there?
I am, Mayor. Thank you. Well, first, I think November 1st is probably an agreeable date. We could have some good weather after that, but I think November 1st, and given the finances you're facing on that, I do not see an issue with that I'm aware of. With regard to how you will decide the footage that a business could place tables with, there's two thoughts there. One is, a clear pedestrian pathway. You need a clear pedestrian, that's a sidewalk. So whatever that creates, a clear pedestrian pathway, they can see it. And your sidewalks are not, one size fits all. They expand out in some areas they come in. So that's going to take a little bit of thinking. I really agreed with Dennis and with Pat that these businesses would not have made it if they had not had that outside dining. That was critical to them. And I think most of them, because it was so well received, I think they would like to continue it if at all possible. And the only other thought I had is where there is an opportunity to come from the curb line in might be at least one way to look at it. In other words, if everyone can come in so many feet, given the way your sidewalk is designed, that would still create a pathway. But you do have trees and foliage and things like that within your sidewalk areas too. So against the facade, how from there out, if it can be done with a clear pathway for the visitor and pedestrian, I do not see a large argument against that. I think it sounds viable.
Thank you, Carol. Rick Perry, are you on the line? Yeah. Tom and Sturgis?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
I thought at the beginning of the conversation about seating, outdoor seating, that I was hearing the city manager sort of making a case for this is a trial run, though not of all our intention, to having outdoor dining after COVID. And anything you do, kind of a planning time to shake out, should the governor allow outdoor dining with alcoholic beverages, which I think the restaurants would want to make it viable, that how could we vision the city after COVID without outside dining with alcohol being served? And that's it.
Thank you, Tom. Sturgis?
Sturgis, got anything?
I really am in favor of you looking at guidelines. And again, I would encourage you, as you stated, that you're going to be flexible. And I think you've kind of got two things going on. One is doing this during COVID times and then post-COVID times, and probably need guidelines for both. Thank you.
Thank you, Sturgis. Anything else from the commissioners?
Mayor, just a comment about indoor dining. It's not only a perception on the part of much of the public that they're uncomfortable being in right now, but just a matter of days ago, within the last 10 days, National Public Radio, and I don't have the exact citation, reported a CDC study of interviews with COVID-19 patients, particularly those middle-aged and older, of where they suspected they contacted COVID. And there's a growing number of cases where people have indicated that they think it's from indoor dining. So that there may be much more risk there than in science thus far has been showing.
All right. Thank you, Dick.
So, thanks.
Anything else? Anything else from the commissioners? If not, I want to try to summarize, help me summarize here. As far as the heater, outdoor heaters, we've had a consensus that they're fine. We gave a few cautionary notes and some policy recommendations. Beyond that, we talked about barricades, and I believe the summary or the consensus was that for all the barriers to be removed, the rental units would be returned to the rental company. Any of those out there that are owned by the city would be returned to the Public Works Yard. That deadline would be on or about November 1st. Is that true, Sharon?
Yes, correct.
Around November 1st. So that gives any restaurants the opportunity to maintain their outdoor seating until about that time, I suppose. And then they'll need to work with the city manager on rearranging their table situation. Again, I wish we'd come up with a minimum distance for pedestrian ways. We don't seem to have come up with that. Do you have a particular process you want to follow? Do these businesses need to recontact you so that they can discuss with you what their plans are in the absence of barricades?
So Dennis and Howard, based on your meeting today, will spend the time between now and the next few weeks in going around to the restaurants that have had outdoor dining based on their spreadsheet, advise them that the last day for the barricades will be we'll be picking them up on November 2nd, the city cruise. So that last weekend, October 31, November 1 will be their last opportunity to have all of the tables and seating along with the barricades. And that's kind of like what we planned anyway. So that would be their last weekend. And then we will continue to monitor that and ask them what their intentions are. You know, maybe by that time, the weather will be, you know, so changed that they're all going to say, you know, forget the outdoor dining. Who knows? Maybe the governor by November 1st will put into action another plan with additional indoor seating. Or maybe go the other way. We have no idea of knowing that. So the answer is, you know, no formulated plan, but I think between Howard and Dennis, we have the staffing to be able to, and we've seen it, they have a relationship with these folks. They can talk to them about what their plans are and then control that in such a way where we want to be fair. But we also, you know, need to tell them that they can't be up against the curb because the barriers are no longer there. So I think, you know, we'll use our collective heads for that and, you know, just ensure that there is a safe area. And of course, we have less pedestrian traffic at that time too. So I know that doesn't answer your question, Mayor, of an exact, you know, length of or width of walkway, but I think that, again, we have the relationship with the restaurant managers and restaurant owners to be able to say, you know, your table's sticking out too far and this isn't a safe condition, please move it. So I think for right now that we're good with that.
All right. So, are there any other comments on this topic?
Yes. Before we leave with the impression that people can have a heightened chance of contacting COVID-19 in a restaurant, we should be very, very careful of our science. What we hear in the popular press is not science, it's reporting. And in fact, I just heard this weekend that bars and restaurants were not the places that people were catching COVID-19. We need to be really, really careful before we say anything about the heightened chance of contacting coronavirus inside of a restaurant. It's just not proven. Let's wait for the science.
Well, I think we need to be mindful that as far as actions that people have to take or restrictions people take inside restaurants, that direction's coming directly from the governor's office rather than from the city. I'm going to move on then. I think we've done good. Again, our goal is to address individual items, individual topics in a timely manner, heading toward February, so that if we need to modify laws or amend laws, we've got we'll be well on track. Our next meeting is scheduled for next Tuesday, September 29th, also at 3 p.m. Before we go to the final citizen comment, I just want to remind people that for the focus items for the meeting of the 29th are business use of city public space and business use of private space beyond the business floor plan. And that could apply to COVID conditions, and it could also apply to post-COVID conditions. Are there any other commissioner comments before we go to citizen comment? Commissioner Posey.
Yes. I have to disagree with Commissioner Legree that we should not encourage people, or we should be careful what we say about the spread of COVID-19 within restaurants. I think it's more important for us to make sure everyone's very careful about it. There's been a lot of published information about people catching COVID within restaurants. And I think that I want to be on the record to say people need to be careful. Restaurants need to be careful. Read CDC guidelines and they'll tell you very specifically. There's some just released today. So I want to make sure that the general public, that we speak to our constituents, don't think it's necessarily the safest place to be. I know I won't eat inside a restaurant.
Thank you, Pat. Commissioner Gossett.
Yeah, just a reminder that in establishing this working group, we had reached out to Dr. Tam at BB Healthcare, and he is very much willing to help give us specifics of for the local region and the local area about COVID transmissions and what have you. So I think that would be something that we want to contact him about. Again, it's let individuals make up their own minds from information that's provided, but I think that Dr. Tam is a great resource for us to take it as local as we can get.
Since you're our liaison for this committee, this topic, if you would like to look into that, we'd appreciate it.
I will certainly do that.
Any last commissioner comments before we go to the public? I don't see any raised hands. We'll go to the public one last time. Go to the order. Carol Everhart, do you have anything further you'd like to say?
Well, I just want to let the mayor and commissioners know, city manager, that with regard to Halloween that's coming up, of course, we've canceled Sea Witch, so that is not happening. But that has not stopped the calls about trick or treat. We have no plans for business trick or treat, but if the city is going to make a decision about residential trick or treat, that is something we can share with the public and the visitor. And I will tell you, I did ask today on our call with the state if they were going to plan on some kind of a regulation decision with regard to trick or treat and with regard to parades. And this was not just our chamber, but all of the state chambers asking that question. And we're waiting for an answer on that. But I thought I better bring that up.
Thank you, Carol. Is Rick still off the line? Tom and Sturgis, do you have any last comments?
No comment. Thank you.
Anybody else? Go on. I'd just like to comment that I hope everybody patronizes our stores and especially outside dining before it gets cold. And even after it's cold for those that install heaters. And we welcome your input. Be sure to send everything to Ann Womack, AWOMACK@cityrehoboth.com, and she'll forward it on the mayor and commissioners. With that, I thank you very much. We'll call this meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks.